Today, she will enlighten us on how to fail better. Learning to participate in another culture. Please help me welcome Dr. Noda.
Thank you. Thank you, Angelica, for the invitation and nice introduction. And Ichikawa Sensei, thank you for the nice introduction and welcome. I'm a Cornellian, and I did my undergraduate and graduate program here. So 50 plus years ago, I was a freshman. And so it's really wonderful to see both teachers, not only of Japanese, but perhaps other languages, and students of Japanese. Welcome. As Ichikawa Sensei said, I serve on the board of directors of Japan America Society of Central Ohio, or JASCO for short. And I've been doing this for some time. And the day after, I just retired from the Ohio State University. So I no longer direct the SPEAK program there. I have to update my website. But anyway, the day after I retired from OSU, I became the interim executive director of JASCO because the former executive director had to quit suddenly. And we just hosted a major international event, JASCO did. And back then, we had very little preparation in place. So I was hoping for a nice rest and relaxation after retirement, but that was quickly replaced by frantic days of fundraising, planning, implementation of the major event, which ended 2 days ago. So the event that JASCO hosted, and I'm going to be reading for the most part, because if I didn't, I won't finish on time. So please excuse me. The event that JASCO hosted this year is called Japan America Grassroots Summit. This event commemorates the friendship between an American captain of a whaling boat, William Whitfield, and a Japanese fisherman called Nakahama Manjiro. Most of the Japanese teachers probably know the name. In 1841, no, it's not working. Oh. The PowerPoint's open. All right. In 1841, Manjiro was marooned in a remote Pacific island and was rescued by Whitfield. Whitfield took the 14-year-old boy home in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, and sent him to school. And 11 years later, Manjiro returned to Japan. Japan that was under its 265-year-old isolation policy. Imagine this, 265 years of isolation. But a few years later, he played a pivotal role in the opening of Japan, triggered by Commodore Matthew Perry's arrival in 1853 on the black ships of Kurofune. In the 30th Grassroots Summit that just ended, we welcomed direct descendants of both Manjiro and Captain Whitfield, as well as the direct descendant of Commodore Perry, along with 60-some Japanese visitors. Many of the Japanese participants had limited facility in English, and most families that hosted them for the homestay had little usable knowledge in Japanese. And still, they seem to bond and foster new friendships. They seem to, that friendship and bonding seemed possible because they shared a common goal of doing things together, of socializing. Now consider the communication between Manjiro and Captain Whitfield 180 years ago. Neither had studied the other person's language. Manjiro probably didn't even know that America existed, much less where it was. how far away he was from his home. But somehow they became friends. And their friendship is ongoing through the exchanges between their descendants. How did they communicate with each other? How do we become able to use language to do things well in society? That is to play the game of socialization. Those of you who are game specialists, how many of you play computer games? Be honest. A little bit? Okay. So those of you who play games or develop games know how. By playing the game. We observe others to get a handle on some of the procedures and rules, and then we try playing. We experience some wins and losses, and through those experiences, learn to play the game better. Oakes and Schifflin's idea of language socialization captures the two-directional nature of becoming a credible member of society while using language. The more we play the language game, the better we become. And the better we become as a social being, and the higher the level of socialization game, the better our language becomes. Participating in a new culture is jumping into a new language game. We can sometimes be frustrated by our own inabilities to conduct things that would be so simple in our own native language. But in the new language, it could become very difficult. But how do we keep ourselves excited about the game when we face the basic fact that we fall flat on our face many times before we can comfortably present ourselves as a sophisticated social being in a new culture? We must first assume that as language learners, we fall down. Not just once, but many times. But we stand up after each fall to continue climbing the ladder of language game. This is the first premise that I would like to have. Our paths are not always golden. A colleague of mine used to tell her first-year language students, we're going to help you fail at a higher level of Japanese culture. Samuel Beckett said, ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. That captures the spirit of our engagement with the language game. But better learners manage those numerous falls so that they're not fatal. This is the second premise, that there are better ways to fall and better ways to get back up on our feet. I suggest that Manjiro had to be a superb language learner. For sure, his survival rested on his acceptance of the idea of fail better. The third premise is that pedagogical materials can play a role in that process, especially at the beginning level when pedagogical materials are more crucial. At least that they do that is the intention behind the specific design of those materials. Anyone who publishes, whether it's a book, Instagram posting, or music scores, anybody who publishes knows that once you publish, that is surrendering the control over the stuff that you publish. The control now belongs to the users. Right? My fourth premise is that some language learners who are good at using the pedagogical materials can do better, and that teachers have a role there as well. And my last premise is that learning by playing the language game starts from the beginning. Learners can participate in a new culture right from the beginning of their language learning. Now, you may challenge any of these premises, but my focus today is not to offer empirical data, research evidence to support my premise, but to build on them. Since we are looking at how we use pedagogical materials, my focus will necessarily be on the beginning level. but I'll make some reference to more advanced levels as appropriate. And my claim today is to focus on social performances as a unit of analysis, practice, and assessment. But first, some basics. What do I mean by pedagogical materials? And I have some samples that some of you are familiar with. Here, I'm talking about pedagogical materials for language learning. They're not aimed at native speakers of the language. And you probably noticed that I'm using the phrase pedagogical materials rather than textbooks. Pedagogical materials appear in multiple platforms and media, not just in a book form. Text is only a small part of the media, and books represent but a small segment of materials. When I use textbooks, the word textbooks, that's when I'm referring simply to the textbook, the book. And text would be in the book. People use different things to learn foreign languages, not just pedagogical materials. Movies, songs, computer games, manga. I'm using pedagogical materials for foreign language learning to refer to those things that have been produced for the primary purpose of aiding learners learn a foreign language. We do use non-pedagogical materials pedagogically, especially at the advanced levels. The significance of the distinction of pedagogical and non-pedagogical materials will become clearer as we continue to talk about pedagogical materials. Who use those foreign language pedagogical materials? Learners, of course. In an optimal case, learners are enthusiastic about the materials they use. They use them frequently, and they use them effectively. In a program of instruction, it is usually the teachers who select those materials for beginning level learning. When we have the right materials for the program, for the goals of the given program, and both teachers and learners use those materials well, then we can expect a spectacular outcome. Sometimes it doesn't work that way, but that's the ideal situation. Importantly, ultimately, the learners themselves have the responsibility for learning. Wonderful teachers cannot learn for them. Great materials cannot do the learning for the learners. It's the learners themselves who have to learn. With that in mind, let's look at what pedagogical materials offer and how we can take advantage of them. Language material authors select and present certain limited aspects of language. A language is not a closed system, nor is culture. Both are dynamic systems that are supported by conventions that are constantly evolving. It's possible to be masterful at a language, but it's not possible to master completely a language, even one's own native language. Allow me to digress here. I'm going to introduce a student that I used to have called Steve. He came to take a placement test with me many years ago and did extremely well. He had studied abroad in Japan as a high school student and then came back and took the placement test. He had no Japanese knowledge when he first went to Japan. Usually, when I see students with similar background as Steve, students tended to have a mixture of high fluency, not so good grammar, even worse, appropriateness. So they were very smooth, but every word they said offended me. Steve was different. Well, not everybody. So Steve, but it was tendon. It was the tendons. Okay. Steve was different. He played the language game really well. He apparently enjoyed it, and he was really good at it. So I asked him, how did he study Japanese when he first went to Japan with no knowledge of Japanese? Here is today's Manjiro, right? He went to Japan and he had no knowledge of Japanese. And how did he do it? Well, he said he gave himself small goals and just worked toward those goals without becoming frustrated by the large amount of things that he could not handle in Japanese. So one day he would focus on excusing himself. He would focus on asking for repetition. He would focus on asking about the weather. He would focus on complimenting someone. Just every day something different, but small things that he could observe, absorb, and practice, and try, and test, and change, and so on. In short, he was actually selecting items for his learning and learned those items in context. Steve went on to becoming a professional translator. So this was a true successful story. Limiting the scope of learning enables learners and teachers to plan and measure learning. Material producers create an inventory of things that will be displayed. And well-designed materials capture socialization instances, as well as the building blocks that we need in order to participate in those instances. Pedagogical materials producers present the selected items in a particular fashion. The items are presented in a particular order, usually so that they can build upon each other. So the table of contents isn't just, here is what you will see. It's, here's what you will see in this order. Right? Material producers find situations when those items are effectively used. So this is a good juncture for me to talk about an approach to language pedagogy called Performed Culture Approach, or PCA. PCA is defined primarily by the assumed goal of language learning, that is, to participate as a productive member in a socialization that are based on target culture, on the target culture. PCA also assumes that language learning occurs through socialization, that is, through experiencing social events that often come with consequences that are culture specific. In PCA, culture is what we do, and performance is a frame for examining, compiling, and assessing our ability to participate in the culture. A performance is a socially situated event that is defined by a specified time, a specified place, specified roles of the players, an audience, and the script or the program of action. Performance is a core experiential learning in that we experience through performing. Through many experiences of performing, we build hypotheses about how things work. Through performance, we test those hypotheses. The learning cycle proposed by the psychologist and learning specialist David Kolb suggests a continuous cycling of concrete experience, reflection, abstract hypothesizing, and active testing, going back to more experience. Performance is essential in both concrete experience and hypothesis testing. When we come into contact with a new culture, or C2, through these hypothesizing and active testing, we build a new set of perspectives, the process that we call compilation of second cultural worldview. Better materials present the selected materials in ways that support construction of second cultural worldview, which in turn supports further learning, performance, and memory building. So let me elaborate further. Here is a schematic diagram of the cycle of compilation of the second cultural worldview that we propose in PCA. In this process of C2 worldview compilation, which is happening here, we experience performances, and that generates personal memories of having performed, or stories. Performances are situated events that are defined by 5 elements. Remember those? Specified time, specified place, specified roles of the actors, the audience, and the script or a program of action. Games are performances with a scoring system. When we participate in those situated events personally, we build memory of having performed. And in order to participate in those, you do have to have these cultural knowledge and language. So I'm not denying the practice that you need to do to be able to perform. You do have to do the basic stuff as well. What I'm saying is that's not the end of it. There is so much more on the horizon. We compile those stories or the memories of having performed to build a new worldview. We may compile a story in terms of various concepts, sagas, cases, themes, for example. Sagas relate to stories of a particular place or people. Cases refer to certain functions such as requesting, apologizing, thanking, and also an organizational notion such as big numbers or things having to do with geology. Don't ask me why I came up with geology, but that's just an example. We may refer to we may refer to themes, cultural values, to compile a story. Usually we use a combination of these things to remember. So let's take an example of a performance of self-introduction. Any self-introduction entails what? Stating one's name? Or does it? What structure do we use if we state our names? Do we state our affiliation? Is that a requirement? What about our hobbies, our academic background? We make decisions every time we introduce ourselves. Then we use the items that we learned in order to execute our decisions. So a particular example here. All right, so this is a few years ago. The photo depicts the first meeting that my mother and I had with the parents of my good friend, Sahoko, who introduced me today. I say my name in the introduction. And then Sahoko's parents do not state their names, but state that they are my friend's parents. Likewise, my mother states that she is my mother. She doesn't say her name. Sahoko's parents add that they are indebted to me for looking after their daughter. My mother responds to say that it's our side that is indebted. So only one person states her name. But using those linguistic tools alone won't result in a win in this game. There's body language and the body movements to be coordinated with the language. How far should I go down? Where do I bend? Where do I put my hands, my head? How long do I stay down? Do I say something while I'm down? Do I look up in order to say it? Or do I say it down here? Performance entails making these numerous decisions and making them instantaneously. Having experienced this performance, I have the personal memory of the story of self-introduction when meeting a friend's parents for the first time in a casual setting. My memory of this performance is compiled in terms of sagas, an adult friend, meeting locations, cases, first meeting facilitated by a common acquaintance. The notion that includes the actual verbiage used and the body language. Cultural themes of hierarchy, formality, expression of indebtedness, and so on. Now, returning to pedagogical materials, well-designed pedagogical materials are likely to include at least one kind of self-introduction in their selection. They present a scene with a clear context in which the act occurs, as well as the linguistic and cultural elements, the tools that we need in order to execute our performances. What can language learners do to learn to participate in another culture with the help of designed pedagogical materials? I'd like to offer just a few ideas. First of all, what is your game? When we play a board game or computer game or basketball game, we know what game we are playing, and we know what we must do in order to win. When we study a foreign language, the game is not clear. What we must do in order to win the game is even less clear. In the game of daily Japanese, for example, when we have lunch with others, we have to declare that we are about to start eating before we take our first bite. And this is often done in chorus. So we have to time it. And then we also declare when we have finished the meal. These are the moves of the daily activities game in Japanese. But how do we know that these are the scoring opportunities for the game? We don't until somebody shows us. When you turn to chapter 2, chapter 5, or chapter 9 in your pedagogical materials, consider what game you are playing. How can you use tools that the particular chapter of the material offers to achieve the objectives that you have? How do we become good at using these tools? By experiencing using them in our performances. How many times? Many times. How many of them are there? An infinite number. And there's the rub. Well-designed pedagogical materials select the crucially important elements that we must learn and practice while deselecting the tools that are not immediately usable. We need to participate in the language game with intentions. Intentions drive the games. Think again about the two men, Manjiro and Captain Whitfield, 180 years ago. They had intentions. First, it was survival, then growth, learning about each other, learning from each other. They had a common domain, whaling. Domain limits our scope to a more manageable range. This is really important at the advanced levels. We cannot master a language, but we can be masterful in a foreign language in a chosen domain. Learning isn't just memorizing a list of items. Learning is adding or modifying personal memories based on performance with the instructor, classmates, a friend, perhaps an avatar. I have a student who's working on virtual reality. Once you have an idea of the game, use items as tools for decision-making to win the game. We need to have control over them. The better we can control them, the smoother our attempts in using them for the game. Third, work on performance. People who are impressed by your performances are more likely to believe you. Con artists know that really well. Performance that works in a particular socialization isn't just forming sentences or uttering words you would use in your own culture, but in another language. When you use the tools with intentions, you perform. Put yourself in the situation and consider the objectives that you may share with your conversation partner or your audience. This leads to the fourth idea. Consider the environment in which the specific tools become usable. Pay attention to the context. Who, what role, and in front of whom is the game being played, and under what circumstances. And finally, sharpen the interpretive skills. What cultural assumptions are hidden behind what you hear or what you read? Again, I encourage teachers to use social performance as the unit of analysis, practice, and assessment. Recall that performance is a situated event. Whatever material you use, try to find situated events that are presented. Analyze them in terms of the 5 elements of social performance. Information about these elements are sometimes overtly presented, but often not. You will find that in some pedagogical materials, even those that present what appear to be scripts for performances, it's difficult to find situated events. If the language the material presents is usable as a script for performance, but the matching contextual elements are missing, try to identify them. But we often see dialogues and texts that are not performable because they are not scripts that are supported by the contextual elements to constitute a performance. They are not feasible. When a script doesn't support a feasible performance, teachers have 3 options. Modify the script so that it matches the contextual elements. Modify the contextual elements to match the script, or avoid using the script. This third option is the least ideal because it means that you forego the chance to practice performance. Let's look at an example. In the Japanese material Genki, which is a really popular material, and I believe it's used here at Cornell as well, it offers dialogues that are identified with contextual information. This particular dialogue is called Shopping. And the video comes with a caption that says, Mary goes to a flea market. So you have Mary here, who goes to the flea market, and this is Mary after she goes to the flea market. It comes in one set. So let's watch the video. And if you understand Japanese, follow it. If you don't understand, follow it. just get the sense of the speed, what's going on, and also try to see the faces, what sort of expressions they have. Okay, the movements.
すみません。これはいくらですか？
それは3000円です。
高いですね。じゃあ、あの時計はいくらですか？
あれは3500円です。
そうですか。あれも高いですね。
これは1800円ですよ。
じゃあ、その時計をください。
これは誰の財布ですか？
私の財布です。ありがとうございます。
So you can see that there are two distinctive performances or performance-like things. And the video does a great job of specifying the elements. The first one takes place at the flea market, and the second one is on the street. In the first scene, Mary has been browsing at the flea market, and she has just picked up a watch near her. Mary is the shopper, and the guy in the white fleece is the vendor. The video captures other vendor over there at the flea market. Thus, the four contextual elements of the performance, place, time, roles, and audience, are well defined. In the scene, Mary and the vendor handle and refer to different watches located at three different relative locations. The sentences are well formed. There are some elements in the lines that are too formal to call it a script that match the scene. Also, the actors deliver the lines very deliberately in what we might call a textbook-ish speech mode. Well, nonetheless, the video captures the scene clearly, and the overall content of the lines basically matches the scene. The second scene is on the street. When we didn't have the video for this material, the script in the textbook looked fairly feasible to me. The video gives the clear context, and by doing so, and ironically, it makes this a non-performance. The place is clear, and the time is also fairly evident. Mary apparently dropped her wallet, and the man found it and is trying to find its owner. The roles are two strangers on the street, one behind another. The man raises his hand, holding the wallet, and asks, "Whose wallet is this?" At the same time, Mary is looking away. His gaze starts at the wallet that he raised, and he pans his head as if to look for the person to whom the wallet belongs. This is a perfect script, the action, if he's in front of a group of people among whom he thinks is the owner of the wallet. But there is no one else, no audience. It's just the two of them. The woman who is walking in front of him, walking away from the wallet, and the man who found the wallet. A more feasible script would involve holding the wallet at Mary's back and calling out, "Excuse me, is this yours? Excuse me, is this wallet yours? Is this your wallet? Or you dropped your wallet." There is a context script mismatch here. Then Mary turns and walks toward him and retrieves her wallet. See how the transaction is depicted. It looks quite formal to me, as if the man is handing a diploma at a graduation ceremony. Remember, though, that this is between Mary, a study abroad student visiting in Japan. And I must say there is a stereotypical depiction of, this is a stereotypical depiction of a foreigner with some knowledge of Japanese who sometimes act overly politely. I guess this is a better side to err. And that matches the audience of this material, that is, students who want to study abroad in Japan. The transaction is over, and Mary remains in place to exchange a friendly gaze. A bit strange for two people who don't know each other. Are there other intentions in her gaze? This is probably an editing issue. These two people just completed acting. So this is probably an exchange of good job, okay? Neither of them part of the depicted scene. I was really pleased when Genki producers came out with a set of video clips to go with their dialogues. But in some instances, the video clips exacerbate the non-performable nature of many of the dialogues contained in the material. Teachers who use the material can still use the script with a few minor modifications. And I believe that that's what the teachers here do. Teachers can modify the script or they can modify the context. Modifying the script poses additional issues because that will result in a divergence from the printed pages of the textbook. You want to avoid that as much as possible because that can confuse students, especially students who are still relying on the textbook. Changing the contextual elements is less confusing, but that requires both keen sense of the concept of context as well as creativity, and of course, time. Despite some issues, the examples from Genki are essentially good presentations of performances. It would be useful for students to learn to participate in these events, especially Mary's part. Learners need to learn the lines and the body language of the script. Teachers need to present the context for decision making. To practice the second performance, the wallet example, we can change the context. We can make it so that the man asks a group of people, whose wallet is it? The change entails the change in the roles. In this new context, there is a person who is responsible for the general well-being of a group of people, and a group of people, one of whom has dropped a wallet. After practicing the script as given in the textbook with the new context, the teacher can then change the context back to the one that was given in the video. But then when you do that, remember, it involves a person on the street who has dropped the wallet and someone who finds the wallet. This context. Learners have to make several decisions. They have to determine which tools in their possession they can use. Since the original script doesn't work, they have to use different tools, different verbiage to create a new script to match the situation to make the overall performance feasible. This is called improvisation. Another type of improvisation may entail producing a written notice like this, next to a photo of the item found. Whose wallet is it? Says the script. So this will entail reading. And this note could be posted on the school bulletin board or on a social media that people in the community tend to view. Able teachers constantly push learners to make decisions about what tools to use to win the game. If the materials you use don't offer any situated event samples, the teachers need to create them for practice. Yes, it's a lot of work. That is why selection of material is important. Of course, if teachers don't have to be concerned with performance as a unit of practice, the job of teaching is much simpler, but it will not give learners the opportunity to experience participating in performance or to build stories that are integral to socialization in the target culture. Using performance as the basic unit of practice may at first seem inefficient. Isn't it more efficient to teach a few sentence structures and vocabulary from which one can produce an infinite number of sentences? You may say that having to learn performance one by one is limiting and not creative. dialogue memorization has a bad rep in the field. Students don't like memorizing dialogues, do you? Many teachers criticize dialogue memorization as a dead-end activity. I argue differently. By using performance as the analytical tool to analyze dialogues from a popular material, I hope I have illustrated how even when individual sentences are perfectly well-formed, a collection of those sentences can produce an unfeasible non-performance script. Instead, I argue that treating performance as a unit of practice entails memorizing dialogues to be used as tools for socialization. Practicing memorized dialogue is different from reciting the lines. It entails engagement through expression and interpretation of intentions in a social activity, through decision-making. The memorized dialogue scripts work as realistic and powerful tool for language socialization. Most pedagogical materials offer exercises that focus on particular aspects of the language, whether it's a set of vocabulary items or structure or something else. Materials that follow the performed culture approach frame those exercises within a situation, allowing teachers to specify the contextual elements of performance. The greater the number of improvisations students can handle with ease, the more effective and active they can be as participants in the new culture. Teachers can easily determine if sentences that students produce are well-formed or ungrammatical. That's up here, language knowledge. But how do teachers rate a performance? Assessment of learning needs to address both the well-formedness of the building blocks as well as the resultant performance. Here I have already argued that performances may be feasible or not feasible. Even if a given script only contains perfectly well-formed sentences, a performance is not feasible if the context does not justify the script, or if a well-informed participant cannot readily come up with the context for the script. So we made a full circle now. All these ideas about social performance for analysis, practice, and assessment connect to what we started with. That is, language is used for socialization, and through socialization, we develop our language abilities. Thank you.